Hello gainers, I'm Ralphie and welcome to my channel called Fitter Philosophy, in which the topic is generally about experience-based, stoic, practical, grounded philosophy to help us think more objectively about the purpose of life, what we put into life and what we get out of life, how we adapt to circumstances and how we make the most of the time that we have. And I'm partway through a new series on funeral stories. Funeral stories are basically back when I was a full-time undertaker in Glasgow, and inevitably as part of this very interesting job, because any job dealing with the human drama and the human circumstance is inevitably going to become interesting, and it did. And I encountered many characters who all had individual and singular stories, which dictated the narrative of their lives. And my story today is, excuse me, I'm just going to clear a small spider, hanging spider out of the camera lens. You probably can't see it because it's very small, but I can, and it's very distracting, but it's out the way now, so the story goes on. I want to talk about Andrew. Andrew was a lovely, lovely person. I met him a couple of times because I was looking after his mother's funeral. Now, he didn't really have too much to do with the arrangements of his mother's funeral. He was still a relatively young man, but he did have friends and a social services person to help him make the arrangements, because Andrew has Down syndrome, and as such, he wasn't the brightest ticket. And I don't mean that critically, I mean it rationally and objectively. But he was also smart because he knew and was very acutely aware of his limitations. And he was looked after by his mother because his father left them both. He was looked after, brought up by his mother, who gradually became an alcoholic, because it's the way she coped with her circumstances and the isolation of being left to bring up a very placid but amicable young man on her own. And that this, by the way, happens all the time. It really does. And as her alcoholism got worse, her health got worse. And as that got worse, she grew less patient with his presence. And she insisted that he spent more time outside of the house. Now, his first retreat was into the garden and into the garage, which he went in and he'd do little drawings and colourings in and all the rest of it. But even that, latterly his mother would come out and he found it quite frightening, because she'd just stand and stare at him and say things like, you know, I deserve better than you and all the rest of it. And he knew it wasn't his mum saying this. He knew it was her illness that was saying this, that was twisting her. And so he accommodated it, he got on with it. But it wasn't until she was running out of money, spending it on alcohol and gambling, of course, when neighbours just a few doors down noticed him out in the street crying. And when they intervened, he was crying because he was hungry, because he hadn't eaten any food for 2 days. And they took him in, they gave him a meal. They realised at that point he needed a wash, so they let him use the bathroom, the shower, and afterwards, on examining his clothes, discovered that they were pretty dirty, and they gave him a set of their son's clothes. Now, this absolutely infuriated his mother, because she could sense the danger here, that someone else was basically getting control of him and his social allowances that he was allowed, that she was getting as his carer, and she might not be able to spend that in alcohol and gambling. So she basically tried to lock him in the garage, but he broke through the back of the garage because it was an old wooden structure. He went round to the neighbours. They saw what was happening. Clearly, the things were ampling up. They informed the social services department, who frankly didn't take a lot of interest. And they were too busy. And so he basically, because one of the sons in that household had left home to go to university, they gave him his room as a refuge, which he gratefully accepted. And at this point, a bond started to grow between Andrew and his new family, because he was a delightful, positive person that had no bad things to say about anybody, only good things. And the energy that he emitted from him, actually, the family really responded very well to. So, I mean, they're talking about a big family here. There was about 4 or 5 children, the mum and dad, and they just enjoyed Andrew's company, and importantly, he enjoyed theirs company. And they went round to his mum and said, listen, you keep the money. As soon as she heard that, she was fine. As long as she could keep the money, she was fine. But they adopted him, and he lived with them for 20 years. As they said themselves, he was a shining light in that family. Everybody loved him, and they accepted him really as their own son, and his adopted brothers and sisters accepted him as their brother. When his mum passed away, it was suggested that he could move into the house and get support to care for himself, but at that point, he was too settled where he was. So the family looked after him. They got his social support money as adopters, and it worked out very, very well, particularly for Andrew. I mean, he was going trips, and he was going on holidays, and all the things that previously were completely unavailable to him for the first time in his life with his new family. It was working, and the reason it worked was because they made a decision, and he made a decision, a small decision in the spur of the moment that had dramatic, life-changing consequences. And this does happen. I do remember that shortly after I left that job, Andrew died. He died of natural causes, because people with Down syndrome are not known for longevity. They have a shortened life. But his funeral was a very busy occasion. He had been volunteering in local charity shop, where the volunteers absolutely took to him. He was to them a shining light. And just his positivity, his energy, his personal energy, that would otherwise have been isolated from the community, found its place, thanks to changing attitudes in a modern culture. It found its place within the community, where he was welcomed and he responded in return. His funeral was a celebration, because it was a moment in time where someone who was presumed to have fewer opportunities in life had in fact, through personality and presence and just being themselves, made a great and found a great opportunity in life and made the most of it. When the family came in after the funeral, just to do the final newspaper acknowledgements and all the rest of it. They took the time, as families do, to actually talk about him, because in a funeral parlour, it's a quiet place, it's a silent place, there's not a lot of traffic, not a lot of toing and froing, and therefore people have that opportunity for contemplation and for staying with the moment of the passing and getting something from that, something important. And that is basically, without perhaps even knowing it, is touching on the true meaning of life. It's not the years in our life that matter as much as the life in our years. Some people come into this world and they have almost 100 years in which to do nothing and to sow seeds of negativity, to be selfish, to be insular, and to be ill thought of by those around them. Whilst others come into this world, they don't have so long with us, but what they leave behind, their legacy, is far more measurable in terms of positivity and inspiration. And it was like that with Andrew. He was a little shining star. And not just to his family, not just to the charity shop, but to the wider community. Because the more he was out and about, the more people would stop and say hello and talk to him. And then inevitably he would direct them down to the charity shop, where they would inevitably go in and they'd buy something. So more money was raised for the charity. And that, gainers, is the way it goes. And from this situation, it's important, so important, that we acknowledge that there's so much to learn from that.